The wind dragged itself across the open land like it had lost its way, lifting dust from the hard-packed earth and hurling it against the fences until the wires sang low and mournful. Eli Mercer stood alone in the yard, sleeves rolled past his elbows, knuckles raw where the hammer had kissed them more than the nails had. A split rail lay at his feet, the old wood cracked clean through, the break pale against the gray weathering of years. He had been fixing that fence for most of the afternoon, working slow, stopping more than necessary, listening to the empty sounds of the ranch, the creak of the barn, the distant lowing of cattle, the wind talking to itself. He liked the quiet. It didn't ask questions. It didn't expect answers. When the voice came, it didn't sound real at first. It slipped between gusts of wind, thin and unsteady, like something imagined. "I need a child." Eli straightened, spine stiffening before his mind caught up. He turned toward the fence line where his land met the scrub and weeds that stretched toward town. She stood there as if she had grown from the dirt itself, small, hunched against the wind, hair whipping loose around her face in dark ropes. For a moment, he thought she might vanish when he blinked. People didn't usually come out this far unless they meant something. "I need a child," she said again, louder now, the words trembling as if they might fall apart before they reached him. Eli's grip tightened on the hammer. Folks in town talked. Even a man who kept to himself heard things. There was a girl who wandered, who spoke to empty corners and begged strangers for things no one could give. "Mad," they said, with a shake of the head that meant relief it wasn't them. "Dangerous," some whispered. "Better to keep your distance." "Miss," Eli said carefully, keeping his voice level, "you shouldn't be out here." She took a step closer, boots sinking into the soft dust near the fence. Her dress hung crooked on her, patched so many times it was hard to tell what color it had once been. One sleeve slipped off her shoulder, exposing a thin arm marked with old scratches, half-healed. Her eyes were too bright, fixed on him with an intensity that made his stomach tighten. "They won't help me," she said quickly, as if answering an argument he hadn't made. "They laugh, or they lock the door. But you listen." Something about the way she said it made Eli's breath catch. He hadn't said a word yet, but she spoke as if she already knew him. "I need a child," she insisted, hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. "I hear him crying when it's dark. He's cold. He's so cold." The hammer slipped from Eli's fingers. It struck the ground with a dull thud that echoed louder in his ears than it should have. His chest felt tight, like a rope had been drawn around it. He hadn't heard anyone say the word child in years without it cutting him open. "There ain't no child here," he said, bending to pick up the hammer just to give his hands something to do. "You've got yourself turned around." She shook her head, hard enough that her hair flew into her face. "No, it's here, or near. I wouldn't come if it wasn't." Eli glanced toward the house, then the barn, then the wide stretch of land beyond. The ranch had been quiet. Too quiet. Maybe. He told himself that crying carried in the wind, that animals made strange sounds at night. He told himself that grief had a way of teaching a man to hear things that weren't there. "You best head back," he said, firmer now. "Sun'll be down soon." Her face crumpled, and for a second the wildness fell away, replaced by something raw and childlike. She stepped forward again, close enough now that Eli could see the dirt under her nails, the way her lips were cracked from wind and thirst. "Please," she said, "I don't need him made. I need him saved." The words hit him like a blow. His breath left him in a sharp rush, and the yard seemed to tilt. He saw, without warning, a small bundle wrapped in a faded blue blanket. Saw a tiny chest that no longer moved. Heard a cry that had gone silent too soon. His own son. The grave beneath the cottonwood. The sound of dirt hitting wood. Eli turned away, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "You shouldn't say things like that," he muttered. "How would you know?" she asked softly. He looked back at her, anger flaring, but it died when he saw her eyes. They weren't mocking. They weren't cruel. They were terrified. "You know what it's like," she went on, voice shaking. "When the crying won't stop inside your head. When you wake up thinking you can still fix it if you just get there in time." Eli felt his knees weaken. He leaned against the fence, the rough wood biting into his palm. He had never spoken those thoughts aloud. Not to the preacher. Not to the men in town who offered clumsy condolences and then avoided his gaze. He had carried them alone, heavy and constant. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself. "Mara," she said quickly, relief flickering across her face like a struck match. "My name is Mara." "Mara," he repeated, tasting the sound of it. "Why do you think the child's here?" She looked past him, toward the low land where the river bent through the reeds. "Because he's calling," she said simply. "And because no one else listens." Eli followed her gaze. The river bend was a mile or more away, hidden behind a stand of trees. An old shack stood there, half forgotten, a place kids dared each other to sneak into. He hadn't been there in years. But last night, as he'd lain awake staring at the ceiling, he had thought he heard something. A sound that didn't belong to cattle or coyotes. He swallowed. "You can't stay here," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Mara's shoulders sagged. She sank down to her knees in the dirt, hands pressed flat against the ground as if she were holding herself in place. "I'll wait," she said. "I always wait." Something about the way she said it, like waiting was all she had ever done, twisted something deep in Eli's chest. He remembered waiting in a hospital hallway that smelled of bleach and fear. Remembered waiting for a cry that never came. He stared at her, at the bowed line of her back, the way the wind worried at her hair. Every sensible thought told him to walk away, to fetch the sheriff, to let someone else deal with her and her impossible prose balk. But sense had never stopped grief from doing what it wanted. "Get up," he said roughly. She looked up, startled, hope flaring so bright it hurt to see. "You'll help me." Eli didn't answer right away. He looked at the ranch, at the fence he hadn't finished fixing, at the house that echoed too much at night. He felt the familiar weight of loneliness settle over him, and then, for the first time in years, felt something else pushing back against it. "Come on," he said finally. "You're gonna catch cold sittin' there." Mara scrambled to her feet, wiping her hands on her dress, eyes never leaving his face as if he might disappear if she blinked. As they walked toward the barn, Eli felt the day closing in around them, the sky dimming, the wind easing as if it, too, were holding its breath. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know what he would find. All he knew was that he could no longer pretend he hadn't heard the crying, whether it came from the land, from the past, or from a broken girl who refused to stop asking. And for the first time since the grave beneath the cottonwood, Eli Mercer allowed himself to believe that listening might change something. The sky had sunk into that uneasy color, between blue and ash by the time Eli finished tightening the saddle cinch. Evening came fast out here, like it was in a hurry to swallow the land whole. The horses shifted their weight, sensing movement, sensing purpose. Eli's hands moved on habit alone, but his mind was loud, crowded with the echo of words he couldn't shake. "I need a child." Mara stood a few paces away, arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly as she watched him. She looked smaller now that she wasn't framed by the fence, like the wind might lift her and carry her off if it wished. Every few seconds she glanced toward the low stretch of land beyond the trees, as if afraid the sound might stop if she didn't keep listening for it. "You sure it's the river bend?" Eli asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded quickly. "That's where it's strongest." Like he's tired, Eli swallowed and swung himself into the saddle. The leather creaked, a familiar sound that usually settled him. Tonight it did nothing. "You'll ride behind me," he said. "Hold on tight." She hesitated only a moment before stepping closer. Her hands trembled as she reached for his coat, then clenched hard, like letting go might shatter her. Eli clicked his tongue, and the horse started forward, hooves crunching softly over dirt and stone. They rode in silence at first. The ranch slipped behind them, fences dissolving into shadow. The path toward the river was narrow, barely used, grass bent low by years of wind rather than footsteps. As the light faded, the sounds of the land changed. Night insects took up their song, and somewhere far off, a coyote called. Mara pressed her forehead briefly against Eli's back. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. He strained his ears. At first there was nothing but the creak of leather and the rhythmic breathing of the horse. Then, faint but unmistakable, a thin cry drifted through the air. It rose and fell, weak and uneven, like it didn't have the strength to last. Eli's heart slammed against his ribs. He didn't speak. He didn't trust his voice. They dismounted near the trees. Eli tied the horse loosely, hands shaking now despite himself. The sound was clearer here, threading through the reeds like a plea. Mara moved ahead without being told, barefoot now, her boots abandoned somewhere along the path as if she'd forgotten them entirely. The shack crouched near the water, more shadow than structure. One wall had caved in, the roof sagging like a tired spine. The crying came from inside. Eli broke into a run. He shoved the door aside, wood splintering under his shoulder. The smell hit him first. Damp, rot, something sour and wrong. Then he saw the bundle in the corner, half hidden beneath a torn coat stiff with dirt. The baby's face was red and scrunched with effort, lips tinged blue, tiny fists trembling. His cries were hoarse, as if he'd been crying for a long time. Eli dropped to his knees. For a moment he couldn't move. The sight of that small, helpless body unlocked something savage in him. Rage at whoever had left the child here, terror that he was already too late, a fear so sharp it made his vision blur. "Hey," he murmured, voice breaking as he gathered the baby up. "Hey, you're all right. I got you." The crying hitched, then softened as the warmth of Eli's chest reached the child. A small hand curled into the fabric of his shirt, fingers impossibly light. Behind him, Mara sank to the ground, a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh tearing out of her. "I told you," she whispered over and over. "I told you he was real." Eli pressed the baby closer, one hand cupped protectively around the tiny head. He felt the fragile rise and fall of the child's chest and forced himself to breathe with it, slow and steady. "We gotta move," he said, though his voice shook. "He needs warmth. Milk." Mara nodded frantically, already shrugging out of her thin dress. She wrapped it around the baby without hesitation, hands surprisingly gentle, precise. There was no madness in her now, only focus, instinct. They rode hard back toward town, the baby tucked inside Eli's coat, Mara clinging behind him, one hand steady against the child as if anchoring him to the world. The horse snorted and strained, but Eli urged it on, fear driving him faster than caution ever had. Lights bloomed ahead, lamps in windows, the doctor's place standing awake when the rest of town slept. Eli didn't bother knocking. He pounded on the door until it flew open, the doctor blinking in surprise that turned to alarm the instant he saw the bundle in Eli's arms. "Good Lord," the man breathed. "Bring him in, now." The room filled with movement and voices. Warm blankets, gentle hands, a stove stoked higher. Eli stood back only because he was told to, his arms aching with the absence of that small weight. Mara hovered near the wall, fingers twisting in her dress, eyes never leaving the baby. The doctor worked quickly, murmuring reassurances. "He's cold, but breathing strong. Lucky someone found him when they did." Eli felt his knees weaken. Lucky. The word felt too small for what it meant. The baby was placed in Mara's arms while the doctor prepared milk. She held him like she'd been doing it all her life, rocking slowly, humming under her breath. The baby's eyes fluttered, then closed, his mouth relaxing into sleep. Tears slid down Mara's cheeks, silent and steady. "He's quiet now," she said in wonder. "He's not scared." The doctor glanced between them, understanding dawning. "Sheriff will need to be told," he said gently. "Arrangements made." Eli nodded, but something firm settled in his chest, something that hadn't been there before. "He's not going anywhere tonight," he said. "Neither is she." The doctor studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "All right." Morning came slow and pale. The baby slept, wrapped in clean blankets, his breathing soft and even. Mara dozed in a chair, head tipped to one side, exhaustion finally claiming her. Eli watched them both, the room washed in early light, and felt a strange, unfamiliar calm. When the doctor returned, Eli spoke before doubt could find him. "I'll take responsibility," he said. "For the child, and for Mara. She didn't harm him. She saved him." The words felt heavy, irreversible, unthinkable, some would say. But when Mara woke and looked at him, hope cautious but real in her eyes, Eli knew there was no other choice he could live with. The ranch would change. People would talk. He would have to answer questions, face looks that judged and doubted. But there would also be a baby's cry in the house again, this time answered. There would be footsteps where there had only been echoes. There would be a young woman learning, day by day, that listening was not madness and that she was not alone. As Eli lifted the sleeping child once more, He felt the past loosen its grip just enough to let something new take hold. Sometimes, he realized, the unthinkable wasn't an act of madness at all. It was mercy.